the newsagents.
I'm not a party political MP. When I'm in my constituency, I'm not a Conservative MP. I represent everybody, regardless of what political party they vote for. And my constituents know that. They also know that I will go the extra mile. I don't do constituencies once a month. I do them most times every week. And my constituents know that I will go the extra mile for them. They know I don't get involved in grubby games or political games in Parliament. They know that I represent them. I put my constituency before my party.
The production team assure me that that actually is Nadine Dorries speaking in the House of Commons. It certainly sounds like Nadine Dorries, and the background noise sounds like the House of Commons. Apparently, it was in 2014 that she was saying this after she'd returned from the celebrity jungle to reassure everybody just what a fantastic constituency MP she is. Is that the same Nadine Dorries that we've got today?
75 days ago, Nadine Dorries said that she was going to resign as an MP with immediate effect. Partly out of protest, partly protesting the fact that she had not received the peerage for Rishi Sunak that she'd been promised and assured she would have by Boris Johnson. And yet here we are, 75 days later, she's still a Conservative MP for Mid Bedfordshire, despite the fact she's not spoken in the House of Commons for over a year, not voted in the House of Commons for months. And senior politicians, including the PM and the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer, are saying that she needs to go, and she needs to go now.
And our production team have helpfully given us today's running order, with part one being, where the fuck is Nadine Dorries? Welcome to the newsagents. It's John.
It's Lewis, and later on in the show we are going to be previewing the first, that's quite a big moment in the American political calendar, the first Republican primary debate for next year's presidential election, which will, you will be amazed to hear, be dominated by one four-time indicted septuagenarian who may or actually may not, emphasis on the may not, even be on the stage.
Won't be.
Won't be. All right, fine. I was trying to build up the suspense, John.
Oh, no, I just spoiled the punchline.
We can't just keep, we'll just have to get you to swear again a couple of times. Just keep the energy up now. Christ almighty.
Right, go on then. So what we're going to do?
What we're going to talk about.
You went off on one on me, and then you've forgotten what we're actually going to do.
Just so distracted. I'm just so worried about your language. No, we're going to talk about where is Nadine Dorries, and obviously listeners to this show will know we've covered Nadine quite a bit, and her amazing political career in lots of ways, and it would be quite fitting that even her denouement, even her ending, even the final bit of her time as an MP should end up being controversial. Because, as we were saying at the top, 75 days ago, she said she was going to resign as an MP with immediate effect. She was part of that string of Conservative MPs, allies of Boris Johnson, who resigned at more or less the same time, trying to wound Rishi Sunak, trying to damage Rishi Sunak, largely as a result, or partly as a result, of a fit of pique, as a result of the fact that they did not receive the honours that they had been promised as part of Boris Johnson's now infamous resignation honours list. The rest did resign. That is why we had that series of by-elections where, generally speaking, the Conservatives did quite badly. But Nadine Dorries is still there. And that means the by-election process cannot start. Because, listening to this, you may think, well, if an MP says they're going to resign, that must happen straight away. But no, they have to do this really weird thing. Technically, an MP can't resign. They have to, and this is again another arcane bit of our constitution, they have to accept, in order to de facto resign as an MP, they have to accept a sort of crown office, which is normally the bailiff of the steward of the Chiltern Hundreds, for example. That is basically how they become an MP, because you can't have a crown office as well as being a member of Parliament. And she has not asked the Chancellor of the Exchequer for that office, and so until such time as she does, she remains a Conservative MP for Mid Bedfordshire.
It would be quite fun just to go down the byways of kind of why the hell does she have to write to the Chancellor of the Exchequer and going to the Chiltern Hundreds and all this kind of mumbo jumbo that goes on when you essentially just trying to force a by-election. But it does mark the end of a really interesting career, because I think that there is something about Nadine Dorries which does stand out, and there's part of it that's very admirable. I mean, she does, she does sort of break the mold. She communicates very brilliantly and is very effective in kind of reaching out to people. She was also, I think, greatly admired by a lot of her civil servants whose back she would have in some of the sort of turf fights that would go on in government. And she was also kind of, I quite liked her being anti the posh boys like George Osborne and David Cameron. But now she's going because she hasn't got a peerage, because she thinks she's entitled to sit in the House of Lords for the rest of her life. And you just want to say, get over it.
Well, so I think obviously we've known about this for some time. The reason to talk about this today is not only because it's 75 days, but it's also because it is actually becoming an increasing problem for the Conservative Party and for Rishi Sunak. Ministers cannot now really take to the radio or to the television and not end up getting asked about what is going on with Nadine Dorries. Because although, as we say, this process is actually entirely in her hands, Sunak can't force her out. They could take away the Conservative whip, but they can't force her out. They are being held as being responsible in some way for it. So, for example, and they are increasingly being attacked by the Labour Party for perceived inaction. So here is Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak just in the last couple of days and weeks being asked about Nadine Dorries.
Happily come back and talk them through when we've got them through.
I look forward to it.
We will. Yeah.
Speaking of productivity, what would you do if you had a backbencher who hadn't turned up for the sort of periods of time that Nadine Dorries has been absent without leave?
I think she should just go. And I've been in Mid Bedfordshire talking to some of her constituents.
That makes one of you.
Well, I know. I mean, we've got Peter Kyle there, who's the MP for Brighton. He's our political lead in Mid Bedfordshire, and he's doing more work than Nadine Dorries up there. But she's got to go. She hasn't been representing them for a very, very long time. He's much more effective than she is, by the way. But she said she'd resign with immediate effect. I don't know what her dictionary definition of immediate effect is. But 10 weeks after the event doesn't seem to me immediate effect. She's got to go, give Mid Bedfordshire an MP who will actually stand up for them, fight for them, because at the moment she's absolutely absent. And I would say to Rishi Sunak, get a grip of this. This is one of your MPs. Do something about it, force the issue and get on with it.
Nathan says, what should happen to an MP who doesn't speak in Parliament in over a year and takes 2 months to officially resign? I think he might be talking about your colleague Nadine Dorries, who hasn't spoken since July of last year.
Yeah, look,
your view of Nadine?
Yeah, I think people deserve to have an MP that represents them wherever they are, and it's just making sure that your MP is engaging with you, representing you, whether that's speaking in Parliament or being present in their constituencies, doing surgeries, answering your letters. That's a job of an MP, and all MPs should be held to that standard.
So she's failing in that, isn't she?
Well, at the moment, people aren't being properly represented, right? But that's, look, we'll have that. We'll have a strong Conservative candidate, Festus, who's there, who's doing a great job. He's Police and Crime Commissioner previously.
So the great tradition, if you are an MP of Labour Party, Conservative, or whoever, is that you hold constituency surgeries where people can come in and talk about the problems they've got with planning or housing or whatever the issue happens to be. And you are a conduit for them. You're like their caseworker. Nadine Dorries apparently hasn't had a constituency office now for some time, and the one she did have has now become a dance studio because she's fox-trotted off somewhere. So, do you see what I did there?
You've been working on that for a while, haven't you?
That was just genius, wasn't it? Well, she hasn't been around. However, we contacted her because we didn't want to. The newsagent's right of reply is very important. We contacted Nadine Dorries this morning, and she's got back to our producer, Laura, and said, "Hi, Laura. Myself and my team of 4 caseworkers are working daily with constituents. I understand that political opponents, such as Labour-run Flitwick Town Council, are choosing the summer and the news-hungry outlets in the summer recess to be noticed. However, we are just getting on with the work."
Which is fine. But you said that there wasn't going to be any more work. I mean, this is the point. No one, if she hadn't said anything, everyone would just expect her to see out the Parliament. So this is obviously a self-inflicted wound. And this has been, it is true in a sense, which is that in the summer where, because it's recess, there are fewer political stories around. There is no doubt that this is a story that is getting more and more attention the longer that it goes on. As I say, Labour are honing in on it. Conservative ministers are being repeatedly asked about it. It's one of those sort of things that is easy as a media story to kind of build up. So, for example, apparently there have been fresh missing person posters popping up across her constituency. One local has erected a Dorries out banner at the local Flitwick rail station. Last month, Flitwick Town Council urged her to resign because of her, quotes, continuing lack of representation of constituents. This week, the usually apolitical Shefford Town Council, great guys there, did the same, claiming she had abandoned the area. And as we heard, Sunak himself has said people aren't being properly represented. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan was asked about it on LBC this week, saying, I don't know when I last saw her, and on it goes. And there is, I think, just irritation, understandably, within Conservative circles, that this is going to be increasingly used and pointed to, fairly or unfairly, whatever is really going on, as by political opponents of the Conservatives, as a kind of symbol of where the Conservative Party is at. This idea that there is neglect, that they care more about themselves than they do about you and the work for you. Because ultimately, as we know, Nadine Dorries partly has done this because, as we say, she didn't get that peerage. And John, as you were saying, in a way, it is a bit of a shame about Nadine Dorries. Because like you, funnily enough, maybe people wouldn't expect this, I've got a lot of time for her. I think she's been a very interesting political figure. She isn't a typical Conservative MP. No. She has got a properly working class background. She has got an interesting perspective. She was a thorn in the side of Cameron and Osborne, who she famously called the posh boys. She did rally against some of Westminster's absurdities. The sad irony about Nadine Dorries is that she has become the thing that she rallied against, that she detested. She's become a creature of Westminster. She's decided to take this stand over she herself not receiving political preferment and a peerage, and that is just sad. In terms of people wondering, like, what is she playing or what is she doing? I mean, some people have said, well, obviously she's continuing to get paid as she's an MP. I suspect it's not that. She actually, because of her success, very successful
as a writer, I
think financially she's more than assured. There is this suggestion that one of the reasons she's clinging on to it is this: she has asked for this subject access request, the information about her and her appointment from number 10, or lack of appointment from number 10 Downing Street. There is this suggestion that it will help her in getting that information as long as she has parliamentary privilege, and she obviously has particular ability as an MP to ask written questions and so on. But if that is true itself, it's hardly a great use of parliamentary time.
It's also pathetic.
Resources. Yeah, I mean,
it's also just pathetic that you are using parliamentary resources to essentially say, why didn't you give me a peerage? And no one is, and look, we could talk about her record of the last time she spoke in Parliament, which is over a year ago. She's not been that assiduous in being that interested in the workings of Parliament and representing her constituents, but she seems to be very assiduous in representing her own interests, and that is a bad look.
Well, we've heard a lot of LBC clips because it is something that LBC presenters are entirely rightly asking about when ministers and shadow ministers trot through their door. Last week, LBC sent reporter Henry Riley, who we've had on the show before, to Flitwick, which is in Nadine Dorries' constituency, to try and find the missing MP.
Have you seen Nadine Dorries?
We've gone to great lengths to try and find Nadine Dorries, and we have a very big advert in the local paper. This is the Bedford Times and Citizen. Wanted, have you seen this woman?
Henry, did you get any whiff, any scent? Did you feel you were on the trail and it was getting warm?
No. Everyone I spoke with said they hadn't seen her in years, let alone months now. You often get that with people talking about the local MP, but there was a real sense of anger, of frustration. There are various issues in Flitwick. You forget on a sort of regional level as well. I mean, for instance, the bus shelter there, they were furious about this new bus shelter they've built because it doesn't allow buses to turn in it, bizarrely. They've built it too narrow so that any double-decker bus goes in can't actually use it. And they've been writing to Nadine Dorries about that, and they claim they haven't had a reply yet. So they were not best pleased.
I'm not sure I blame her. I'm not entirely sure what you say to that. Seems unfortunate. But I suppose, I mean, did you... there is a suggestion she doesn't live in the constituency, right? So this is builds on like long-established resentment, presumably, or anger.
Yes, and her office is only about 5 miles away from Flitwick, and so there was a sense that they did see her in the area quite a lot beforehand. And one thing that I spoke with a lot of constituents about is she's been the MP there since 2005.
Yeah,
long time. And I was looking back at her maiden speech, which was in May of that year, and she said, I always pledge to do my best for Mid Bedfordshire. I will always act with integrity. I will always put the interests of people in Mid Bedfordshire above everything else and raise their concerns in Parliament. Now, whether you have a view one way or the other on Nadine Dorries, if you don't speak in Parliament or vote in Parliament for the time that she has, then rightly those people don't feel that their concerns are being listened to.
One of the curious things about this whole situation, right, is at the moment there is this kind of shadow by-election going on, right, which is that the Conservatives have chosen a candidate. The Labour Party's got a candidate there who is constantly, I see him sort of tweeting about the constituency and saying, we're getting ready for this by-election. You've got Peter Kyle there, as Keir Starmer was saying on LBC to James O'Brien yesterday. You know, they're running this campaign, but there is no campaign. It's weird.
And Greg Hands was there 2 days before I got there, the Conservative Party chairman, campaigning with their candidate. He's actually quite well known because he's the Police and Crime Commissioner there, Festus. And when they were out campaigning, it's bizarre because I was speaking with a few local Conservatives as well. And if it's an MP who's had the whip removed or there has been some particular reason why they have been chucked out of the party, it's different because you can distance yourself. But she's a sitting Conservative MP who they are campaigning against in many ways because they want her to go.
Did you find... Okay, so she hasn't been seen, and we haven't heard of her much, but did you get a sense there was an affection for her among people that you spoke to, or was it kind of just sod off?
I think what you were saying earlier about her civil servants, her being very popular among civil servants, there were certainly a few people who did like the chaos of Nadine Dorries. They enjoyed that she was going out to bat for her man, as they saw it, Boris Johnson, during the whole leadership shenanigans. They enjoyed that she's not afraid to say what she thinks. But there was a sense that the kind of I'm a celebrity shine when she went on the jungle, and a lot of people referenced that in quite a positive way, really. They liked the fact that she did that in some ways. I'm sure not all of them did, but they found it amusing. That seemed to have slightly wore off, and I did expect to have to find more affection for Nadine Dorries among her constituents, but even among lifelong Conservatives, as they told me, they couldn't put aside what had happened for the last few months or year.
This does, like, I mean, in a way, it is... Nadine Dorries has a way, obviously, of getting attention, and she has brought this on herself. But in a way, it is a slightly wider issue than her. The truth is that there are far fewer than there used to be, by the way, but there is still a sort of phalanx of MPs, particularly longer-serving MPs, who don't do a lot. You know, they don't speak often in the House of Commons. Their constituent, it can be highly variable how seriously a particular MP takes their constituency responsibilities. There's no requirement. It's basically up to you as an MP how much, particularly in safer seats, sometimes how much you think you can get away with. Again, much rarer than it used to be. Most MPs these days are hard working, but that is true. But most of them go by without much attention, because as long as you stay on the right side of the party and you maintain the whip, then actually, and you have far lower profile than Nadine Dorries, then it's fine. It's actually one of the drawbacks in a way. People always talk about the constituency system we have in this country. It's good in one way, but when you only have one MP per constituency, which is not true of other countries, which tend to have multi-member systems, it is one of the drawbacks. If you get a bit of a feckless MP, or an MP who isn't taking their responsibilities particularly seriously, there's not a lot you can do about it as long as they maintain the party nomination.
Or if you've got an MP who is the Foreign Secretary or whatever, and where they're required to be travelling the world a lot of the time, then they're not going to be able to spend as much time in the constituency.
Yeah, but she's in the Cotswolds, John. There's a bit less, a bit less excuse.
No, I'm not trying to give her a pass here. It is extraordinary, and I think the longer it goes on, I'm sure Rishi Sunak would love to be going into the Tory party conference with all of this well behind him, and it won't be.
But although it's no win, right? Because this either continues to hang around his neck, and it's a bit embarrassing, or she does go, and then of course she's got the by-election in Mid Bedfordshire. And who knows, maybe she's just waiting still, thinking about the timing as to when that might be most embarrassing. And of course, there is the Conservative. If she were to go in early September, by-election could well be around the Conservative, or just after the Conservative Party conference in October.
Henry Riley, thank you. Keep on searching. If you find her,
let us know.
Let us know.
Will do.
Also,
ring this number.
Also, just to be clear, Nadine, we'd love to have you on the newsagents. You know that. Messaged you many times. Please come on any time you'd like. We'll be back after the break with the Republican Party debate and Donald Trump or not. Welcome back. And if you find yourself sleepless tonight at 2 o'clock in the morning, the debate starts in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, of the Republican candidates vying for the nomination to be president next year. There are going to be 8 hopefuls on stage, and there is going to be one very prominent person who won't be on stage. Donald Trump has decided to sit it out, which means that we, onlookers, the American people, are going to be denied the Socratic debate skills of Mr. Donald Trump. Here's a reminder of him in action back in 2016.
I have a policy question for you, sir.
Let's see if he answers it.
I
will. Don't worry about it, Marco. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, little Marco. I will. All right. Well, let's hear Big Don. Donald. Don't worry about it.
All right, wait.
Don't worry about it, little Marco.
Gentlemen,
let's hear
gentlemen.
You ought to show up.
Gentlemen, you got to do better than this.
This guy has the number one.
Mr. Trump, may I ask you, Mr. Trump, I'd like to ask you a policy question. Your proposed tax cut.
That's why the people in Florida do not like him.
It's a nice trip down memory lane, isn't it? Some of the best moments. I mean, he really is. I mean, a titan of debating. What can we say? You know, funnily enough, because I'm sad, I was watching the 1960 presidential debate, the first one between Nixon and Kennedy, the other night, because this is my married life now. Well, basically my pre-married life as well.
So you're saying your married life now, you've got this beautiful wife, and you just sit around watching 1960 reruns of presidential debates?
Yeah.
Jeez.
And
why did she say yes?
It's a quandary for us all. But you know, honestly, it is amazing the extraordinary decline in the quality of the debate. People remember that 1960 debate as like you know, as being this sort of fractious thing, and Nixon and Kennedy sort of had it out. They are so respectful. It's unbelievable. Like, in a sense of kind of, they are so deferential to each other, saying, well, I agree completely with Senator Kennedy, I agree with the Vice President there, you know, we both all agree on how to get there, it's just a question of means. Like, the fractiousness now. But I suppose the difference with those clips there in 2015-16 is, look, I mean, Trump then he was the outsider, right?
The insurgent.
He was the insurgent. He needed to be there. Now he is, despite all of the predictions after 2020 and January the 6th and the indictments, despite all of that, the suggestion was that he would lose his crown as the de facto leader of the Republican Party, but he still is. So he's thinking, what's the point in turning up?
So after the first Republican debate, which was held in Cleveland in 2015, 2016, I was there, and then into the spin room, which is where the candidates go and, you know, kind of talk about how well they did in the debate, came Donald Trump, and there was the most almighty scrum that formed around him, and I was part of that scrum. And where I could get to, and you couldn't, you know, my nose was pressed against the nape of his neck. I couldn't get front.
Oh dear.
And all I could smell was hairspray and sweat. And I just kind of kept looking at the marvel that had kept his hair in place.
Still there.
The architectural achievement of building that hairdo in one place. But this time round, Donald Trump is like 37 points ahead, I think, according to the poll of polls, of his nearest rival, Ron DeSantis. And he's got an unstoppable lead.
What do you think about this idea, which is now sort of doing the rounds and percolating more and more in sort of American press, which is that actually most of them, which seems completely counterintuitive to us, that most of them are now angling for the VP spot.
Yeah.
Because if they're angling for the VP, they sort of know that it's over. There's just no way. There's this immovable block of Trump voters, Republican voters, that just doesn't matter what happens. The indictments are sort of playing into his sense of persecution. It's solidified his support. But they basically know that Trump is going down for at least one of these things, and therefore he will not be able to take up office, and that therefore if he wins the election and they're the VP, they become president. Do you think that's actually credible?
I think it is credible among some of them. So if we go through the runners and riders, and there are going to be a whole bunch of names that frankly are not even household names in their own households, but you've got Senator Tim Scott, Republican senator from South Carolina. He may be going for the vice presidency. You've got Vivek Ramaswamy, who's a sort of young biotech entrepreneur, 38 years old, was putting up photos of himself playing tennis topless yesterday, and Martina Navratilova commented about his lousy backhand. You've got Mike Pence. He is not going for the vice president's job. No. There is not a
been there, done that,
been there,
almost got killed.
DeSantis, I think, is still going for the nomination. DeSantis believes he can win, so he's not. Nikki Haley, who was the former UN ambassador for Donald Trump, yes, possibly. Chris Christie, absolutely not. Chris Christie is going in there as this giant wrecking ball who is prepared to take out anyone and everyone, but particularly Donald Trump, who he now absolutely detests, even though he backed Trump in 2016, was hoping for a big job and didn't get one. There's a guy called Asa Hutchinson, who used to be the governor of Arkansas. He's also hugely critical of Donald Trump, so he's not going for the vice presidency, and he's too old anyway. And there's a guy called Doug Burgum, who is the governor of North Dakota, very small state.
Titans, these guys.
Yeah, Titans, these guys. Donald Trump, don't think that he's suddenly become this kind of wilting violet who's going to sit at home quietly doing nothing. He is upstaging the debate, or he's going to attempt to. The debate is being screened by Fox. He is doing a sit-down interview with the most famous presenter that Fox had to get rid of a few months ago, Tucker Carlson, that will run at the same time as the debate. And tomorrow, in the US, when all conversation should be about who did well in the debate, who did badly, the analysis, it's all going to be about Donald Trump again, because that's the day he's chosen to go to Fulton County Jail to faces arraignment charges of election interference in the 2020 election.
He still manages to upstage them
by
getting arrested. That's what he's willing to do in order to sort of maintain the limelight. But the Fox thing that you just alluded to, John, I mean, that is one of the fascinating subtexts or subplots of all of this period, right, with Trump, which is his relationship with Murdoch, right, which is that Trump continues to be this really difficult, thorny problem for Murdoch and his empire in terms of how to deal with him, right? We know what happened with the Fox and the Dominion defamation case. We know that that's cost Murdoch a huge amount of money.
Well, $750 million.
Unbelievable amount of money. That in an ideal world, I mean, it's been reported many times, Murdoch wanted to move away from Trump, that he wanted to bury him after January the 6th, that actually in so many ways they've always had a fractious relationship, and Trump is not what Murdoch would ideally like in a kind of Republican candidate and a Republican president. And yet, like so much else of American conservatism and the wider American right, there is this inescapable gravitational pull towards Trump. And so much of Fox's profits, which there still are, a huge amount, still rely on the Trump show. And in a way, right, this is partly Trump saying to Murdoch, you know what, you need me far more than I need you. Not least when you consider, I think this is one of the things that's been sort of missed in the last few years, which has been a really big transformation, even since like the 2016 run, is the decline in the number of American households who have cable news. I think back in 2015-16 it was 70%, it's now 40%. So even that juggernaut, which was partly responsible for the rise of Trump, i.e. television and cable news, is itself on the decline while Trump continues to ride high.
And also, Trump being on your show brings viewers. And so Trump is saying, okay, Fox, you don't love me, you don't want me, I'll go to Newsmax. I'll go to One American News Network, where they do love me. I'll go to Tucker Carlson, who is now homeless.
I'll go to John Sopel.
Yeah, I don't think that is going to happen.
I'm coming on the newsagents, John.
Anytime.
I don't need these guys. I see you got a middle chair there empty.
Yeah,
Emily left you guys behind, sad.
I don't think Donald's going to be doing me anytime soon. But the fact of the matter is that he knows how to garner publicity. And so even before the 2016 election, Murdoch had his huge doubts about Donald Trump, but had to get on board. In 2020, In the lead up to the election, they were right behind Donald Trump because he was obviously running for re-election. But after January the 6th, as you say, they put distance. And we know from the disclosure of the emails that were being sent among Fox News executives, they knew also that Trump had lost the election. But they're now in a position where they're losing money, they're losing viewers, they're losing ad revenue as a result of, this kind of breach in the relationship with Donald Trump. They tried to get behind Ron DeSantis at the start. Ron DeSantis has just been a really poor candidate who just has failed to convince. And so if he becomes the Republican nominee and it's against Joe Biden, what does Fox do? Is it going to suddenly think, we'll clamber back on board? And I don't think Trump will give a shit. I think he'll be quite happy. Yeah, you want to clamber back on board? You want to give me free publicity? That's fine. It will be on my terms. And Donald Trump will rule the roost again.
And it's a quandary that the wider American right have, right? And the wider Republican Party has, which is that there was always, there were different camps. There were those who loved him. There were those who, particularly in 2016, did not like him, but were willing to swallow it because he was the Republican candidate. And so much water has passed under the bridges. It's obviously pre-indictments. It's pre-January the 6th. There was all that stuff about, actually, he'll change when he's in office, all that. The worst predictions of all time. And then there were the sort of never-Trumpers who, they left even in 2016. And that has obviously been a growing band. And the question clearly for that middle group who have sort of not particularly cared for him within the Republican Party but been willing to tolerate him. I mean, the stakes could not be higher going to that presidential election when your candidate is not just Donald Trump, but it's Donald Trump who has a very high percentage chance of going to jail. And bear in mind that the federal prosecutors have a 95% success rate, right? When the feds come for you, they come for you and you're probably going away. That is, well, on one level, it shouldn't even be a quandary. It should be a case of, well, this guy's beyond the pale. But as we've learned time and time again with the American party system and the Republican Party, the line is never quite where you think it is.
The thing you can't exaggerate enough is the sense of total fear of Donald Trump. They're terrified of him and what he might do, whether it is to the party or whether it is to individuals whose reputations he can trash, whether it is to a candidate who you suddenly put up a primary against because you don't like something that they've said about Donald Trump. And so you have a party that is terrified of him. And Donald Trump has worked on the Machiavelli maxim that it is better to be feared than loved, although Donald Trump is that odd mix that he loves to be loved as well as being feared. And so the party doesn't move. And so they're always hoping that someone else is going to take him out. I'm firmly of the view that overwhelmingly the leadership of the Republican Party, such as it is, believes that Donald Trump is an absolute menace and that wouldn't it be wonderful if he could just go away quietly. But I can't be the one to lead the charge. And so you get someone like Chris Christie who is coming out and saying, yeah, I'm prepared to lead that charge. But the establishment Republicans, they don't want to do it because they're going to lose donors and they're going to lose voters. Because if Donald Trump says, I'm going to pick up my ball, okay, I'm not going to run, or I'm going to run but run as an independent and not as a Republican, then
that's it, game over.
That's it, game over.
Biden will win 450 electoral votes.
Exactly. And so they are terrified of him. And that is what is governing this primary race now, this race for who should be the Republican nominee. And that's why they're still sucking up to him, even though they know he lost the 2020 election.
But they're talking about fear. I mean, arguably, it's wider than that, right? You could argue that Trump is the most feared political figure in the history of the American Republic, right? Because everyone's afraid of him.
Yeah.
I mean, the right, as you say, are afraid of him, or the Republicans are afraid of him because they're afraid of what he might do because he now commands the party. The left are terrified of him because they basically know, well, they think, well, the guy won in 2016, but they also know that he's a menace to the American Republic. Like, if he wins again, all bets are off in terms of what happens to American democracy.
And the international community?
Terrified of him. For the same reason. Not least because the stakes are higher now than they were in 2016, because in 2023 and 2024, you've got Ukraine. And the weird thing, I suppose, though, is that the weird dynamic has been that the change, maybe compared to a year ago, is that Biden looks weaker than a year ago, right? Like, actually, when we were talking about the midterms and the aftermath of the midterms, there was this sense that there was this sense that, Biden actually, he was looking difficult to beat, that he'd been surprisingly resilient. That meant you needed someone other than Trump because Trump was a busted flush. And now there is this sense within the Republican Party that Biden is declining, both politically, but also potentially in terms of his health as well, that it's an easier sell and that Trump could win. And that both enables his supporters but terrifies his opponents, both within and without as well.
And just the added perversion of it all is that the calculation in Trump land is not that you say Biden is useless. You ignore Biden. You talk about the indictments because that is solidifying support amongst Trump voters that the system is against him, that their guy is always being brought down. It's the deep state that is trying to destroy Donald Trump. And that is what's being the most effective. So you have got this situation where it really is, for Donald Trump in 2024, it's the jailhouse or it's the White House. That's the choice. Anyway, look, we're going to be discussing this an awful lot more on tomorrow's special episode of News Agents USA. It's so special, in fact, that Emily is breaking off her holiday to come on and discuss what has happened in the overnight debate.
She's back.
She's back. News Agents USA, bigger, better, bolder, tomorrow on Global Player.
Happy to help you out with your ratings, John. You need it.
Before we go, a postscript on something we did on the podcast yesterday and last week, and that's the case of Mason Greenwood, the Manchester United striker, who is no longer going to play for Manchester United. And we spoke yesterday to Adam Crafton as well as Rachel Riley on the podcast. And Adam, I asked, well, which clubs do you think would take Mason Greenwood? And we kind of talked about what countries, what places. And there's one country, of course, that is spending a huge amount to build up its football profile, and that is Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and the Telegraph have reported today that Mason Greenwood, quote, is set to be snubbed by clubs in Saudi Arabia over major concerns about how a move would be perceived. The Saudi Pro League is already under intense scrutiny over human rights issues in the country, and while not absolutely ruling out the prospect of a club showing interest, sources believe they will not want the added baggage that would follow Greenwood at this particular time. So Saudi Arabia distancing themselves over reputational risk, Saudi Arabian government, from Mason Greenwood.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia worried about the human rights record of Mason Greenwood.
Irony is dead.
We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
The News Agents. This is a Global Player original podcast.